had been a lot of backlog in the disposal of the main matters. So this is one small background when we speak about revisional jurisdiction. Likewise, it also happens on the criminal side practice. Now, for our session, we are not touching upon the criminal revisions which arise from the subordinate courts. Our session would be only on the civil revisions which falling under the section 115 of CPC or under article 227 of the Constitution. Now, therefore, the session is to explore the scope of this revisional jurisdiction before the High Court. When we speak about revisional jurisdiction, you would be conscious of the fact even district courts exercise powers of revision to some extent on certain matters. So we are also not touching upon those things. We are looking at only revisional jurisdiction of the High Court. I am going to just put in my thoughts as to how this revisional jurisdiction evolves and how it has traveled over a period of time with a lot of legislative changes. And ultimately, what is today available before the High Court as a revisional jurisdiction will be the concern under which we will travel through this session. I will take you only through a slight overview. I will not get into various niceties because it is a vast area of practice. My friends may get various doubts whether I have to file a revision, whether I have to file an appeal, whether in particular instances whether revision will lie or not, what will be the scope of revision. So there are so many niceties on that. We will not be touching much upon it. But on a overall, if you get an understanding as to how this is operating, we may be able to arrive at what ultimately we require. Now, under the constitutional system of this country, you know that courts are vested with jurisdictions based on certain causes. For example, on an original cause, a subordinate court, a civil court, be it a munsif or a sub-court, will have a jurisdiction to entertain a original proceedings. Likewise, on an appellate cause, the subordinate court at times and the district court at times, and more particularly the High Court, would exercise a jurisdiction which normally we call it as an appellate jurisdiction. Now, does the High Court also has an original jurisdiction? Yes, of course it has. So far as Madras High Court is concerned, you know that we have an exclusive original side which exercises the jurisdiction of original causes. Certain High Courts which have been formed under the Constitution may not have the original jurisdiction, but our High Court being a chartered High Court, we have the original jurisdiction. Now that apart, still all other High Courts have a limited jurisdiction on the original cause, namely special original jurisdictions which arise in cases of judicial reviews, in cases of writ petitions, challenging various proceedings of authorities and so on. So therefore, the cause of a jurisdiction before a court is based on the original cause, based on appellate cause, and to some extent the special original jurisdiction, which is nothing but a judicial review which we seek before a court, questioning certain actions, questioning certain enactments, so forth. Likewise, as part of this various jurisdictions which the courts exercise, more particularly the appellate jurisdiction of court, also encompasses within itself a power called revisionary jurisdiction. This has been a baseline of a superior court on the basis that the superior courts should have an exercise of superintending power on the subordinate judiciary. So therefore, as you are aware, Madras High Court was established by a chartered under the letters patent, and till date we continue to be known as a chartered High Court in the country. And the powers of the High Court is also from, other than letters patent, derived from the Constitution and various other statutes. This you will be aware that various different statutes also vest certain powers on the High Court by way of appeals, revisions, confirmations, different proceedings are there. So under these various statutes, when High Court exercises this power, the more important power of an High Court is the supervisory jurisdiction which exercises over the subordinate courts and tribunals. Now, as I said, there had been times when civil revision petitions were being the norm of the appellate side lawyer, which has now reduced. Likewise, over the past few years, if you see, there have been a lot of tribunalizations which is happening. Now, with these tribunalizations also, there are powers which the High Court exercises over these tribunals by way of this supervisory jurisdiction. Now, why this revisional jurisdiction? or why the supervisory jurisdiction of the High Court. If you try to get into the understanding of the Constitution, our constitutional scheme itself functions on various doctrines, which you would have heard that many speakers have said derived from different countries' constitution or different experiences which have. And one such doctrine on which the constitutional system of this country functions is the doctrine of checks and balances. Be it the case of the three pillars of the Constitution, executive, legislature, and judiciary, or various executive powers and all other areas, the Constitution works in a mechanism of checks and balance. They don't want any power to be vested only with one body. They had created checks to ensure that the powers are exercised within the framework of the rule of law. So therefore, this supervisory jurisdiction of High Court, which results in a power of exercising revisions or entertaining revision petitions, is part of this classic example of checks and balances recognized by the Constitution. Now, when I say revision jurisdiction is vested on the High Court in its capacity as the court exercising jurisdiction of superintendence over the subordinate courts as well as the tribunals, we need to look out where this power comes from. The power of superintendence of High Court is where it is derived from. So therefore, on this broad introduction, now let us see what is this revisionary jurisdiction of an High Court. Firstly, as I said, we need to look at where does this power is derived by the High Court, for which we can get into the Constitution of India. As you are aware, the major powers exercised by the High Courts under the Constitution is Article 226 and Article 227. Now, under Article 227, the High Courts are vested with the power of superintendence. Let us see what is the wordings in Article 227 of the Constitution of India. Article 227 starts with power of superintendence over all courts by the High Court. Now, sub-article 1 of 227 says, every High Court shall have superintendence over all courts and tribunals throughout the territories in relation to which it exercises jurisdiction. Then sub-article 2 of Article 227 says, without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing provision. So therefore, under sub-article 1, the provision says our High Court will exercise the power of superintendence over all subordinate courts and tribunals. Now, without prejudice to that generality which is provided under sub-article 1, sub-article 2 says that the High Court may call for returns from such courts. Then it says, make and issue general rules and prescribe forms for regulating the practice and proceedings of such courts, and prescribe forms in which books, entries, and accounts shall be kept by the officers of such courts. So, as I said earlier, in the larger scheme of the constitutional provisions, the independence of judiciary is essential. You are all well aware, as far as subordinate judiciary is concerned, it is still within the administration of the executive. Like state government has a power over all these subordinate judiciary, but such power should not in any manner affect the independence. So therefore, part of it, High Court is vested with the power of superintendence. As I read from Article 227, High Court has all powers to regulate the business of the subordinate judiciary. Therefore, High Court will have a right to call for returns from the subordinate courts as to what business it is being carried out, like what cases have been entertained, in what manner the cases have been disposed of, and what is the number of cases which is there. So entire data with regarding to this. Then it also has powers to issue general directions, general rules, and prescribe forms also. So all these powers as part of the independence of judiciary is vested with the High Court, so that the High Court has entire control over the subordinate judiciary. So this revisionary jurisdiction, which is the subject matter of our discussion today, is derived by virtue of the right of the High Court to exercise this power of superintendence over the subordinate courts. Now, sub-article 3 of Article 227 says, the High Court may also settle tables of fees to be allowed to the sheriff and all clerks and officers of such courts and to attorneys, advocates, and pleaders practicing therein. Now, then there is a provision. Provision says, provided that any rules made, forms prescribed, or tables settled under subclause 2 or subclause 3 shall not be inconsistent with the provisions of any law for the time being in force and shall require the previous approval of the governor. Then subclause 4 says, nothing in this article shall be deemed to confer on a high court powers of superintendence over any court or tribunal constituted by or under any law relating to armed forces. Therefore, there is one exception. If there are tribunals functioning within the jurisdiction of a high court, which are established relating to armed forces, the high court will not have a supervisory jurisdiction. So, other than that, all subordinate judiciary and tribunals are within the supervisory control of the high court. So, therefore, as I said earlier, the concept of revisional jurisdiction comes within the supervisory power of the high court. Now, for the purpose of this specific session, now let us see how the high court is exercising this power under the Code of Civil Procedure Code. Now, the code regulates, Civil Procedure Code regulates the conduct of proceedings before civil courts, which we normally call as civil proceedings. A general outline, if you can just have a small thought process, the remedies before the courts can be into 3 categories. One is a common law remedy, which is a civil remedy. There is no specific right under a statute or anything. For example, if you are filing an injunction suit before a municipal court, it is not based on any statutory provision that you can file an injunction suit before a court, but it is based on a right vested in you. So far as there is a right of an individual, and if there is a breach of such right, you have a remedy before a court of law, which is called a common law remedy. Only procedures and reliefs which are part of this common law remedy is regulated, and such regulation of procedures are under the Code of Civil Procedure. Then 2 other remedies which you can look just for a thought process deviating from the session is that we have statutory remedies. Certain rights are regulated by statutes. So those statutes provide you remedies as to where you have to approach. Example can be the Rent Control Act. Rent Control Act, landlord and tenant. And that special statute will give you a remedy as to what you can seek against a landlord or what you can seek against a tenant. And that statute will again say that as to which forum you have to approach. A rent controller is named under the statute, a rent control appellate authority is named. Likewise, you have very many statutes, like physical statutes, you have Income Tax Act, Sales Tax Act. Statutory remedies are also one such remedies. Now, other than statutory remedies, the most common thing is each of these fundamental rights, you have a remedy by way of approaching the High Court under Article 226, approaching the Supreme Court under Article 32. This is on the constitutional remedies. So, therefore, we are now today concerned with the civil proceedings. Civil proceedings are before the civil courts. Now, hierarchy of civil courts, you are aware, municipal courts are at the lowest level, then you have sub courts, then you have district courts, and you have the high courts. And in exceptional cases, procedures are being regulated by the Code of Civil Procedure. Now, a part of the code, while regulating the civil proceedings, provides a right of appeal against any judgment or decree which is passed by a civil court. So, the code recognizes a right of appeal for a litigant against the proceedings before the civil courts, which is, when we speak about civil proceedings, is there anywhere a definition as to what is a civil proceedings? It is not so. As I said, when we speak about civil proceedings, it is nothing but a common law remedy or certain statutory remedies which are provided. Now, there had been one instance as to whether what constitutes a civil proceedings was a question before the Honorable Supreme Court. That was a case reported in 1966, 1 SCR, page 190. It is a case title as Commissioner of Income Tax Bombay versus Ishwar Lal Bhagwan Das and others. That was a case where an income tax officer's order was challenged before the High Court in a writ petition under Article 226. The Bombay High Court set aside that order at the conclusion of the proceedings, the counsel for the petitioner sought leave to appeal before the Supreme Court against that order. Now, a certificate was granted by the Bombay High Court, permitting the petitioner to approach the Supreme Court by way of an appeal against the decision. Now, when the matter came before the Supreme Court, the respondents took a plea, rather an objection, to the entertainment of appeal based on the certificate given by the High Court, on the contention that Article 133 of the Constitution, which enables the High Court to grant a certificate, speaks about an order in a civil proceedings. So therefore, Supreme Court had an occasion to consider what would constitute a civil proceedings in this case. Though this is not a case arising from a civil dispute or from a civil court, the Supreme Court was posed with this question to decide. So in that case, while deciding various other things, the Supreme Court in one paragraph observed, the expression civil proceedings is not defined in the Constitution, nor in the General Process Act. The expression in our judgment cover all proceedings in which a party asserts the existence of a civil right conferred by the civil law or by statutes and claims relief for breach thereof. So this is the exact wordings which the Honorable Supreme Court recorded in the judgment while a question as to what is a civil proceedings came up for consideration. Now, having said this, the Honorable Court said that as and when there is an infringement of such civil rights, it results in the person seeking for a remedy before a civil court. And if the claim is proved, the result of such civil proceedings is that there shall be a decree of a declaration if rights of declaration is sought for, or there shall be a decree of an injunction, be it a mandatory injunction or a permanent injunction, or there may be a decree for delivery of possession or divisions in property, or cases where claim of damages or compensations are made relating to certain breaches of agreements whatsoever. So therefore, the Supreme Court said this is what will constitute a civil proceedings, and in the result of a civil proceedings leads to all those things. So as I said this, I said that a civil proceedings will result in a relief which will be in the nature of a declaration of rights or injunctions or delivery of possession, so forth, so on. So therefore, a culmination of a civil proceedings, a suit which is filed before a subordinate court, ends with the finality of a judgment being rendered, which results in a decree being granted in favor of the party, in whose favor the finding is there in the judgment. Now, this judgment and decree under the Civil Procedure Code entitles you to go on appeal if there is a grievance on the decision of the civil court. So therefore, there are appeals arising from the judgment and decrees of a civil court proceedings. Now, this right of appeal, according to the Honorable Supreme Court, is a substantive right as provided under the code. As I said, the Civil Procedure Code provides a right to file an appeal against a judgment or decree. Now, as you are aware, the appeal lies to a superior court from that of a court which decided the issue. Similarly, as against this appeal from the original cause, which you take it to the an appellate court. Sometimes it may be the district court, sometimes it be the high court, which normally we term it as the first appellate court. There is also a remedy of a second appeal which the code recognizes, which is to the high court from the district court. So in a civil court, from the original cause, there is a substantive right of a party to prefer an appeal at the first instance, then a further right to the party at the second instance called as second appeal. Now, is that second appeal is also a substantive right? Is a doubt. This is again a question for discussion which can take you to various learnings on that subject. Suffice for me to say that a first appeal is a natural right. Any person can file a first appeal. The first appellate court will decide all issues as that of a trial court, including the facts in issue of law as well as facts. Whereas when it comes to the second appeal, unless you satisfy the court that there is a substantial question of law to be decided, you don't have a right of a second appeal. This is what the Civil Procedure Code says. So I am only taking you through the scheme of things in a civil proceedings. So now this, where do you find all these rights against as regarding first appeal, second appeal? Is simply you can go through sections 96 to section 103 of the Civil Procedure Code. From 96 onwards, it speaks about what is the first appeal and what is the format of first appeal and what is that you have to plead in a first appeal, what is that you can raise, and the manner in which the first appeal has to be dealt with by the appellate court. Then in section 100, you get what is the right of a second appeal, which makes it clear that a second appeal can be considered by the court only if there is a substantial question of law. And what are all the other parameters which the courts are to be considered for these appeals are provided under section 96 to 103. Now, other than this, the code in its schedule by various orders also gives you a guidelines as to procedures in respect of these appeals that you get it under order 41 and 42. So this is on the civil proceedings as it is. Now, apart from this, a civil suit is filed, you seek some remedy, and you get into a finality of that, and you get a decree or judgment, and whoever is the agreed person goes to a first appeal, second appeal. This is the culmination of civil proceedings. As I said earlier, now this entire travel of a civil proceeding, there are various issues which come up. Like from the first stage, when a suit is filed, you have to cross a question as to jurisdiction, be it pecuniary or territorial. Then as a question to the relief which you are seeking and the court fees which has to be paid on the relief. So even at the threshold, there are various issues which come up in a civil proceedings. For example, a civil court may say that I will not have a power to entertain the suit, therefore I am returning it and enabling you to present it before the proper court for a consideration. And in a case, a court may say that I don't have the territorial jurisdiction, you have to present it before the appropriate court. And in cases where the court may say that you have not framed your relief properly or you have not paid the proper court fee which is required to be paid, therefore until such thing is satisfied, the suit may not be entertained. So from the threshold, there are some certainties. Now, once the suit is entertained, you have to cross every stage, like service of summons. Then comes the question of raising certain maintainability issues. Then comes the question of raising an issue as regarding rejection of the claims. Then you get into your right as regarding filing of pleadings. If you are a defendant, your written statement to be filed. You are, as a practitioners of law or with some years of experience, you are all well aware. There are so many changes which had come. Days were there when a written statement, filing of written statement or a time for filing of written statement was purely at the discretion of the court. Court used to grant you 1 year, 1.5 years. Adjournments had happened on many times. All those things have been now brought forth by way of amendments where courts are now restrained to say that this is the time limit before which you have to come forward. So these are all. Then as to documents, what the plaintiff files, whether those are admissible documents, those are all documents which can be looked into. What the defendant files, if there is additional documents to be filed. These are all different stages of that suit, and at every stage there are certain questions which come up for consideration. Now these questions are also answered by the civil courts. Now answer to these questions, does it result in a judgment and decree giving a finality to the suit? It may not. Many a times answer to these questions will result in a kind of an order being passed by the court. Now this order will also be supported by certain findings of the court. So therefore there will be a kind of a order which sets out what is the cause for that application or that stage of proceedings, and what is the objections or what is the plea which is being put forth by the other person. Then the courts render a finding saying that I am accepting this plea or I am not accepting this plea, and these are the reasonings on such, which results in an order. So these orders, which at times may be certain interim orders, which at times may be orders which give a finality to the suit proceedings also, are also orders which require certain consideration. Suppose if the lower court fails to exercise a jurisdiction which is vested, or in cases where the lower court travels beyond the jurisdiction which it has, or courts which decide certain matters which on the face of record you find that there is a grave irregularity or an illegality, what will happen to these orders? Now, these orders, there are certain orders which are coming up in the civil proceedings. Now, does the code answer or does the code provide for some resolutions for these situations? Yes, of course it provides. Apart from what I said from section 96 to 103 as to appeals from the judgment and decree as well as second appeal, section 104 provides for filing appeals from orders of the civil code. So for the purpose of this session, one important area is that you may have to look at section 104. Now, in terms of the enabling provision under section 104, under order 43 of the code, it sets out various orders under applications which are appealable orders. Now, when I speak about all these things, as I said, in a civil proceeding, there are various stages. Those stages have concerns relating to jurisdiction, pecuniary or territorial. Pecuniary is the valuation of the claim which you go before a court. Suppose I value a suit at 1,000 rupees, the suit will lie before a particular court. Suppose I have a relief in a civil suit and the valuation of such relief or the subject in issue is about 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs. Based on that, my proceedings will go before a different court. Likewise, I am seeking a relief in respect of certain property. It's an immovable property. It is delineated by a particular jurisdictional area, either the village, town, or taluk and district. So based on that, again, you have to go before the concerned courts to seek relief in respect of immovable properties. Or the jurisdiction, territorial jurisdiction is based on the cause of action which you plead, where the plaintiff resides, where the defendant resides, or where the cause of action arose. Take a case where you are seeking for recovery of money. Then you have a promissory note or some negotiable instrument based on which you are going to file a suit. Where the document was executed is one of the cause of action, or where the defendant resides is one of the cause of action. So these are all the jurisdictions which arise. Then in a suit, the stages of the suit, you will also look at who can be the parties, who can be a plaintiff, and when you are suing against a defendant, who are all the necessary and proper parties. In a given case, there may be one defendant. In a given case, there may be 20 defendants. But you have to establish as to what is the necessity for having all those defendants in the same cause. So therefore, you will decide on who are the parties to the litigation. Then you may have instances where there are bar to certain suits. Certain enactments provide that there will be a specific bar of a civil court to entertain any suit. Or at times it says there will be a bar to the civil court to grant any injunctions in respect of a subject matter under the special statute. So therefore, there will be an issue about bar in filing a suit or seeking a particular remedy. Then, as I said earlier, valuation of the suit claim, which also results in the court fees to be calculated and placed before the court. Now, when you come up with the civil proceedings, when you come up with a suit, you may also have to look at what kind of interim orders which you have to seek. Because in any list, there needs to be a protection of the subject matter. There is no point in filing an injunction suit saying that the defendant should not encroach upon your property, and you don't file an interim application seeking for an interim injunction. And end of the result, by 2 years' time or 1.5 years' time, when the suit comes up for a trial, and you ultimately find that the defendant is already encroached upon and he is there. So he comes up with a plea saying that the suit relief is infructuous because today I am already in possession of the property which he is saying. So therefore, every suit, every list before a civil court will have some kind of a protection to be obtained. So that is what we call the interim orders. Either it may be an injunction, it may be an attachment, it may be a stay, whatsoever. So these are all the procedures. So within these procedures, I said there are various orders which are emanating. And is there any appeal against these orders is regulated by Order 43 of the Code of Civil Procedure. Now, as I said, all these issues invite certain findings as well as rendering. Therefore, this is the area in which effectively we are today looking at. Now, these orders, if there is a provision for appeal, yes, I invoke that provision and go before the court and seek an appeal. If suppose there is no provision for appeal, there are certain orders which the code does not recognize as an order which is appealable. Then what happens? Now, in that order, if it is part of the proceedings which it takes you to the finality of the suit, you may not have a grievance. Suppose if it is not part of the proceedings which takes you to finality. Rather, if that order is passed, you may have a finality of the suit itself, or the findings in that order is likely to affect your main relief in the suit, or you have a grievance that the suit court does not have a jurisdiction, or there is a huge material irregularity or illegality. So therefore, you need a remedy. So this is what is framed within the revisionary powers of the High Court. So therefore, this takes us to the pertinent question as to what is section 115 of CPC. This is the provision under which we come before the High Court by way of a revision. Now let us see what is 115. I will read through the provision so that you also follow it up. Now 115 of the code says revision. Now under subsection 1, the High Court may call for the records of any case which has been decided by any court subordinate to such High Court. This is the enabling provision. So High Court can call for record of any case which has been decided by any court subordinate to such court. Then, and this is very crucial. Now this section proceeds saying, and in which no appeal lies thereto. So a decision which is made by the civil court, and if there is no appeal lies against that order, then you are entitled to invoke 115. And it further says, and if such subordinate court appears, so it further restricts the power, saying that at the first instance, such order is not an appealable order. Therefore, you have a right of revision under 115. Then it adds that such subordinate court appears at A, it says, to have exercised a jurisdiction not vested in it by law. So the first requirement is that you have to show to the court that such subordinate court had exercised a jurisdiction not vested in it by law. Then the next provision says, to have failed to exercise a jurisdiction so vested. The court has a jurisdiction, but you wanted the court to exercise the jurisdiction, court has failed to exercise the jurisdiction. Then it says, to have acted in the exercise of its jurisdiction illegally or with material irregularity, the High Court may make such order in the case as it thinks fit. So this is the power of revision by which you can approach the High Court. It starts with the saying, High Court can call for records of any case which has been decided by any court subordinate to such High Court. Then it says, in which no appeal lies thereto, and such subordinate court appears to have exercised a jurisdiction not vested in it by law, or to have failed to exercise jurisdiction so vested, or to have acted in the exercise of jurisdiction illegally or with material irregularity, in which instance, if you petition to the High Court will interfere under section 115 and make such order in the case as it thinks fit. Now the section doesn't end with it. Like every other section of our legislature, we always have provisions, explanations, subsections. So therefore, that are also material. Now first provision, provided that the High Court shall not, under this section, vary or reverse any order made or any order deciding an issue. Please note each words. This is what I was pointing out when I said about orders in application. So any order made or any order deciding an issue in the course of a suit or other proceedings, except where the order, if it had been made in favor of the party applying for revision, would have finally disposed of the suit or other proceedings. Now, effectively in the provision, what it says is that if you are aggrieved by an order and you want the High Court to interfere by way of revision under section 115, you should satisfy the High Court that if this order comes in my favor, the entire proceedings will come to an end. This came by way of an amendment. Now, earlier to that, this was not the entire case, entire provision. Section 115 had within its ambit one more subsection which was still larger in aspect. I will come to that slightly a bit later. So this was again part of law commission everything. Now let us complete the section with the further subsections. Now subsection 2 says, the High Court shall not, under this section, vary or reverse any decree or order against which an appeal lies either to the High Court or to any court subordinate thereto. See, this is an instance where if this order is reversed, still there is an appeal which will lie either to the district court from the sub-court or to the High Court from the district court. Even in that instance, it says that High Court shall not interfere. Then in subsection 3, it says a revision shall not operate as a stay of a suit or other proceedings before the court, except where such suit or other proceedings is stayed by the High Court. This was one important amendment which came because, as I said earlier, days were there when in every civil proceedings, the request of the trial court lawyer would be that whenever there is an order which is not favorable to him, sir, please go and meet my friend who is an advocate at High Court, file a CRP, get a stay of the proceedings. Now, other than stay, earlier at times, what would happen is that whenever High Court exercises this power of revision under section 115, for example, a CRP is filed and High Court deems it fit that there is something which has to be looked into, entertains the CRP and issues notice to the parties to come and answer the court. Now, this entertainment we normally say is an admission of the CRP. Now, once an admission of the CRP happens before the High Court, now come back to the original first line of section 115, which said the High Court can call for record. So, even without a stay, what was happening is that as and when a CRP was being admitted, there will be an order saying that call for the records from the lower court. Times there were judges who are very clear saying that you call for only the proceedings relating to the IA. But if that is not made, whenever there is a request from the High Court to call for the record, the lower court, but for the record sheets, but for the proceeding sheets which it has, entire thing will be bundled and it will be sent to the High Court. So ever since from then, what will happen before the lower court? Though there is no stay before the High Court in the CRP, lower court will say records are sent to High Court, cases are adjourned. So these have been the difficulties where finality to the civil proceedings was not happening. So this was considered, and the Law Commission came up with some suggestions as to amendments to be made. And one such amendment said that the revision which is being filed before the High Court under section 115 shall not operate as an automatic stay of the suit. So therefore, the High Court has to make it clear, if it thinks to stay the proceeding, there should be a stay. If there is no stay, then the lower court proceedings has to go. Now, as I said earlier, section 115, which I read to you, which is available in the statute books as on date, was not the exact provision which was there prior to the amendment. Now, I'll only point out what was the interesting clause which was there prior to the amendment. Let us not get into all other things. There is one subclause in the proviso. The proviso which I read was a complete proviso. Now, earlier that proviso used to be as subclause A and subclause B. There was a B proviso which said the order, if allowed to stand, would occasion a failure of justice or cause irreparable injury to the party against whom it was made. So this was available prior to the amendment, which enabled the High Court to interfere in this revisionary jurisdiction by invoking section 115 in cases where the party was able to show that there was a complete failure of justice or there is a likelihood of causing irreparable injury to the party. Now, by removing this section, does it mean that the legislature today wants that injustice or irreparable injury to continue? It is not so. It is in a context that if there are certain things which had happened in interim order stage, let the suit get a finality. And in the final decision of the suit, if this continues as a finding against a party, he still has a remedy by way of an appeal to the first appellate court, then a second appeal to the High Court. So therefore, the focus was on that suit should attain a finality. So in this context, the section 115 CPC was toned down to some extent, restraining the High Court not to interfere in every other matter. In that context, this subclause B of the provision was removed. And today it only says, now look at the larger picture of 115 today. It requires that an order against which no appeal lies. So therefore, first instance, you have to satisfy that such order is an order against which no appeal lies. Then it says there are three criteria. The order by which the subordinate court had exercised jurisdiction should be in a case where it doesn't have jurisdiction, or should be in a case it has jurisdiction, failed to exercise, or material irregularity and illegality. So these are all. Then it also adds a provision says that in any case, the order against which you are coming to the High Court by way of revision, if it is decided in favor of the person who is approaching the court, decides the suit to a finality. The classic example would be that I file an application to reject the claim. The court dismisses it. I can maintain a revision because if the High Court agrees with my view and allows my application, the suit attains a finality. So there are so many such instances. So these are the criteria which have to be satisfied. So I said certain important things again for the purpose of getting into our heart, getting into our mind very clearly. I am reiterating is that order in which no appeal lies. Then it is a question of jurisdiction. Either it lacks jurisdiction or it fails to exercise jurisdiction. Then the order results in failure, illegality or material irregularity. Now, what is illegality and material irregularity is a very vast term. It is subject, of course, a subjective issue. Therefore, it depends on case-to-case basis. Then it also speaks about patent illegality. Then, as I said, proviso, which says that order should finally decide the list. So these are all the instances. Now, having said this, therefore, what requires to be seen at the first instance is what are the orders against which an appeal lies? This is provided under Order 43. I'll just read through this Order 43 for you to just take note as to what are all the orders against which an appeal lies. At the first instance, it says an order under Rule 10 of Order 7, returning a plaint to be presented to the proper court, except where the procedure specified in 10A has been followed. So therefore, if a suit is returned for presenting before a proper court, and if you have a grievance that such decision is wrong, then you have a right of appeal. Then it says an order under order Rule 9 of Order 9, rejecting an application for an order to set aside the dismissal option. If a suit is dismissed and you file an application to set aside that order of dismissal, and that application is rejected, you have an appeal. Then an order under Rule 21 of Order 11. Then an order under Rule 13 of Order 9, rejecting an application to set aside an ex parte decree. Then an order under Rule 34 of Order 21, which comes under the execution proceedings as to an objection to a draft of an agreement or an endorsement, and right of appeal lies. Then an order under Rule 72 or Rule 92 of 21. These are all under the execution proceedings. Likewise, an order rejecting an application made under Sub-Rule 1 of Rule 106 of Order 21. So there are very many orders under Order 21, wherein a right of appeal is provided. Then under Order 22, which is effectively the abatement of proceedings of bringing on record the legal representatives so-and-so. If there is an order in terms of Rule 9, an appeal is provided, which is for the setting aside of abatement. Then an order under Rule 10 of Order 22, giving or refusing to give leave. Then an order under Rule 2 of Order 25, rejecting an application. Then an order under Rule 5 or Rule 7 of Order 23, rejecting an application for permission to sue as an indigent person. Then an order in interpleader suits under Rule 4 or Rule 6 of Order 25. Then an order under Rule 2 or Rule 3 or Rule 6 of Order 28. Then likewise an order under Rule 1 or Rule 10 of Order 40. Then an order for refusal. So it goes on. You only need to look into Order 43 to see the orders on which appeal lies. Now, as I took you through these provisions, you would have understood for yourself, these are orders under different stages. One stage which I said is the suit proceedings. Now, interestingly, you will see beyond the suit proceedings, at execution petition stages, there are again various applications which come up for consideration, orders are not passed. Likewise, even in appeal stages, given a case where an appeal lies to a district court and you are before a district court, an instance where you may file an appeal against an interim order of injunction before a district court. And in that proceedings, you suffer some order and you find that it requires a reconsideration. Then you have to look into whether it will come within consideration of Section 115 of CPC. So therefore, the suit proceedings at the first instance, post judgment and decree at the execution stage, and even at the stage of appeal, if the appeals are before the courts subordinate to the High Court. So these are all the scopes as far as Section 115 is concerned. Now, I read to you the instances of orders in which an appeal lies. So therefore, other than these orders can be a subject matter of revision. Now, can we say that this right of revision is a substantive right, or you have in law a right to file a revision? It is not so. Because one thing which you find is that either when I read Article 227 or Section 115, these two provisions does not recognize a right of filing a petition. It says, effectively it says, the High Court in exercise of its supervisory jurisdiction will have these powers. So therefore, you petition, satisfy the court that there are instances which enable you to come before the court, and therefore you require a remedy. Now, when you require a remedy, is it that the High Court has to grant a remedy in that case? Now, effectively, if you get into these provisions and the enormous case laws which have available as regarding these powers, you will find it is not that as a matter of right, you can petition the High Court to exercise a revisionary jurisdiction. It is only a discretion which High Court exercises. What is required is that you have to satisfy the High Court that in your power of superintendence, it is required that it has to be rectified. You will effectively point out to the High Court that, yes, these things have happened, which comes within your power, therefore please interfere. It is a vast difference as regarding your substantive right of appeal, which is recognized under the court. So therefore, these are effectively fall within the realm of a discretion to be exercised, but at the same time, you are well aware that a discretion cannot be always a point of arbitrariness. Any discretion to be exercised by the court has to be within the four corners of a rule of law. This is well settled principles of the courts. Therefore, whether to exercise discretion or not, again, it falls back on you as to how you satisfy the court for exercise of this discretion. Now, having said this, now let us see what is the nature of these orders or nature of exercise of power under Section 115 and how the Supreme Court looks into. At the end of the session, I will also put it across to you, certain paragraphs from judgments. For the present, just for the sake of flow of the events, I will only point out that you have to primarily show that if the order is passed, the same would decide the suit, this, which I have said. Now, in a case reported in 2003, 6 SCC, page 659, a case of titled Shivashakti Corporation Housing Society versus Swaraj Developers. The Supreme Court had this to say about the powers under Section 115. Those orders which are interim in nature and does not decide the list finally cannot be subject matter of revision under Section 115. So this is one jurisprudence which has evolved from Supreme Court in a decision saying that if that interim order does not decide the list for finality, 115 doesn't happen. Now, all other criteria which I have said earlier are again matters of subjective. So therefore, you cannot have a hard and fast rule. But if you are able to satisfy the court based on a precedent on particular fact situation or based on a precedent as to a particular position of law and demonstrate there is an illegality, you are entitled to have it. So therefore, for each and everything, you may not have a hard and fast rule, but precedents will help you. Enormous judgments are there on every other situation. I am not elaborating as to various situations which arise because you in your experience would have come up so many things. We will on the broad discuss about the principles alone. Now I will take you through some more judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court as regarding the powers under 115. And with that, we will also get into a situation where suppose if a case doesn't fall within this parameters of Section 115, is that the end of it in spite of the fact that there is a gross illegality committed? That falls for consideration for you invoking Section 227 of the Constitution. So therefore, today a situation is that if a case doesn't fall under 115, still high courts have power under 227 to interfere. So therefore, you over the period of time, in fact, you would have seen that Madras High Court has categorized this case as CRP's pending disposal, CRP's non-pending disposal. Then if it is a case under Article 227, it takes a different nomenclature and it goes through. So I will refer to few judgments. I will also take you through those judgments. Before that, let us see what is this ambit of Article 227. As I said, if you don't fall within the four corners of Section 115, seeking a remedy before High Court in its revisionary jurisdiction, then you have a remedy under Article 227. This is again recognized by the Supreme Court in very categorical terms. Now, having said about Article 227, a question may arise, is there a case for Article 226 also? Now, interestingly, till date, there are various high courts which entertain petitions titled as petition under Article 226 and 227. Fortunately, for our High Court, we are clear. A 226 petition is a different petition, a 227 petition is a different petition. But there are High Courts which says that. So therefore, there had been instances when court dealt with this issue and saying whether 226. Earlier, in fact, Supreme Court in one of the judgments said that an order of a civil court can also be interfered in a petition under 226. That is a case reported in 2003-6 SCC page 675. The title of the case is Surya Dev Rai versus Ramchandra Rai and others. Now, there the two judges of the Honorable Supreme Court held that there is no restriction of filing a petition under 226 challenging civil proceedings. Now, however, it is very crucial to note that this proposition of law of that judgment has been now set aside in a subsequent judgment reported in 2015 5 SCC page 423 titled Radhe Shyam versus Chabinar. This case was taken up by a 3-judge bench on a reference by another 2-judge bench, finding that the case reported in Surya Dev Rai may not be the correct position of law, for which they also referred to an earlier judgment of 1986 in Umaji Keshavarao Meshram and said the petitions under 226 and 227 are paramountly different. So therefore, referring to this, a reference was made, and therefore Supreme Court in this case of Radhe Shyam settled the law very clearly that orders of civil court cannot be a subject matter of question in a petition under Article 226. Now, interestingly, if you get into it, there are many judgments of various aspects, like whether limitation will come, whether limitation will not come, then whether the exercise of power under 227 is an appellate jurisdiction or only a revisionary jurisdiction. So these are all interesting points. As time finds, you may have to explore those things. And there had been instances when a single judge of a High Court decided a petition titled as 226 and 227 and held a particular point. Now, as a matter of right, the party went before a division bench saying that any decision of a single judge, it is subject to an appeal before the division bench of the High Court. Then the High Court examined this issue and said that if it is a decision under Article 226, yes, there is a right of appeal before the division bench. Like in Madras High Court, in terms of Clause 15 of letters patent, you have a right of appeal before the division bench against single judge. But they said if it is a decision by virtue of the supervisory jurisdiction or the revisional powers of the High Court, which is exercised under Article 227, you don't have a right of appeal to a division bench. So they categorized these cases, differentiated them, and held that if it is a 227 petition, it falls within the parameters of the supervisory jurisdiction of the High Court. So therefore, in cases where you are not able to have your remedy within the parameters of Section 115 of CPC, and still you find that there is some gross illegality or material irregularity in the orders of the court or the procedure. Primarily, if you look at various judgments of Supreme Court, the deriving factor is that you cannot find fault with the decision arrived. But if you are able to show that the procedure adopted for such decision, or on a question of jurisdiction is there, or on a question of gross illegality, or take instances where the earlier precedence has not been taken into consideration, you are entitled to invoke the powers of the High Court to exercise the revision. This is the broad contours which you can find, which clearly says, even if the decision is wrong, if the procedures are correct, and if it is an interim stage, you are bound to accept that, go ahead with your civil proceedings, bring it to a conclusive end by way of a trial and judgment being rendered, and then appeal it. But if that order, though it may be on the face of it right on its decision, but still the procedures adopted or the principles which have been accepted by the court or rendered as a finding is wrong, which is the patent illegality or which is the material irregularity, right? or in the case of jurisdiction, then court says that yes, you are entitled to come before the High Court. So in that case, again, as I said, if your case doesn't fall in 115 because it is only an interim order, it doesn't decide the list to its finality, then what do I do? Then you go to the High Court under Article 227. So therefore, this is the broader view as regarding the revisionary jurisdiction of High Court. As I said, it is part of the appellate jurisdiction. The base of such jurisdiction is based on the power of superintendence which the High Court exercises over the subordinate courts. Now, other than this revision, there are special statutes which provide revision. But take the case of Rent Control Act. Rent Control Act says the decision by the rent controller is subject to appeal by the rent controller appellate authority, and it doesn't give a finality to that. It says if there is certain questions of law to be decided, a revision will lie under Section 25 to the High Court. Likewise, various legislations are there, special legislation, which vests certain powers on High Court by way of appeal or revision. Now, this apart, when we come to Article 227. Now, when we speak about Section 115, as I told you, this arises under the civil proceedings, predominantly from the civil courts, subordinate civil courts. Now, in cases of Article 227, you have a vast area which is opening up in the recent past, which comes by way of the tribunalization which has happened. So, various tribunals are set up. Now, the jurisdiction of High Court, take the cases of company, jurisdiction of High Court is today taken away and vested with the NCLT. The recovery suits of banks and financial institutions is taken away from the original courts and taken to the DRTs, and so like insolvency jurisdiction, which is part of the High Court or part of the subordinate courts, now gets affected by repeal by virtue of the IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Court. So this tribunalization, special acts coming into force. Now in these cases, again, if there are orders which are dehorse the procedure, take cases of breach of principles of natural justice, which is the very driving factor of a rule of law. Any proceedings, there should be a compliance of principles of natural justice. A person should be afforded an opportunity. Take cases where this is breached by tribunals. As I said, income tax tribunals, sales tax tribunals, industrial tribunals. Now, all these categories, again, if you have an issue, if you have cases where you find the orders either on the finality or at the interim stage being decided, which is without jurisdiction or failure to exercise jurisdiction or patently illegal or material irregularities on the face of record, then you have the remedy of invoking the provisions of Article 227 and petitioning the High Court to exercise the supervisory. Therefore, a vast area. Now, interestingly, in these tribunals, take the case of DRTs under the SURFACI Act and DRT Act. The remedy at the first instance is before the DRT. An appeal remedy from that decision is to the appellate tribunal. Now, beyond that, the Act doesn't say anything about it. So, therefore, under the scheme of the Act, the decision of the appellate tribunal is final. You don't have any further appeal. You don't have an appeal even on a substantial question of law as in the cases of civil court. So, decision of the appellate tribunal is final. Now, in those cases, if there are certain things which has to be questioned, you find that the very procedure adopted is wrong. You find that the jurisdiction which is not available under the special act is exercised. Then what is the remedy? You come to the High Court and invoke this 227. Now, cases of tribunals are concerned, there is also a case which Article 226 is invoked and question the authorities. So this is also merged with it. This has been often a part of discussion. Recently, the High Court, Madras High Court, has been categorically saying whenever matters are coming from DRT and DRT, it shall be titled as petitions only under 227. We will not entertain a writ petition under 226. This is also based on certain judgments of the Supreme Court, which categorically says it is a supervisory jurisdiction, you exercise only under 227. Because 226 is a right of the court to issue prerogative writs, which is under the larger scheme of things. Now, there will be certain things which the court cannot do while exercising 226. But in 227, it will be able to exercise. Likewise, in 227, it may not be able to do. One simple thought process is that in a 226 petition, suppose if you question a order of a subordinate tribunal, subordinate forum, an adjudicatory forum, what is that the High Court is supposed to do is that it cannot sit on appeal. This is a settled question. So it is not an appeal in disguise. So you cannot say that you set aside the order, grant me this relief, because it is not a court of appeal. then what it can do? It has to, in fact, effectively set aside. This you can equate it to the provisions of section 34 of the Arbitration Act, which says that an arbitrator's award can be set aside. Beyond that, High Court cannot give. To some extent, in exercise of 226, High Courts are bound to set aside. Beyond that, that jurisdiction is in fact called as a correctional jurisdiction. If it finds that there is something wrongly done, High Court is supposed to correct it, lay down the law, and set out what it is. In a given case, it may say that order has to be set aside because there is no jurisdiction, right? But in a given case, that there is a material irregularity, order needs to be set aside, but still there should be some relief which has to be granted. If that is the case, very technically speaking, in terms of correct jurisprudence, High Court has to only lay down the law in its correctional jurisdiction, tell this is correct, and send back the matter to the concerned tribunal to decide. But of course, in our experience, we see that that line has crossed many a times, and High Court steps in and grants you relief and says that I'm setting aside this and I'm dismissing the proceedings. So many things are happening. Only on the academic side, I think you need to equip yourself on all those lines by reading through various judgments on these aspects. If you go through the judgments, the jurisdiction of High Court in cases of Article 226 being invoked against the decisions is only a correctional jurisdiction, not cases of prerogative writs. That is different. I am not getting into that. I am only on this limited aspect of the supervisory role, revision, as well as the power of the High Court under 226 as against this. So this is the sum and substance in respect of the revisionary jurisdiction of the High Court, as I have taken you through the section 115 of CPC in respect of civil proceedings. Then I have taken you through the provision, invocation of Article 227 of the Constitution. Then I have said about what lies in Article 226 also. So in effect, if you look at, this is one area of a very interesting practice. As I said earlier, advocates of the High Court had a very big passion in respect of these revisions, which had to some extent reduced, but still the scope is there. But this sets down the entire tone as regarding the functioning of the entire subordinate judiciary. At the given hour, if these kinds of interference by way of High Court in its exercise of superintendence does not happen, there is a likelihood of a great injustice being caused in the proceedings before the subordinate. In the entire process, I have not set out various illustrations or instances that you may have to take it into consideration, because time is also not there for us to get into all those things. Now, if time permits, I can run through a few judgments alone, certain paragraphs, then leave the session for my friends to raise any queries or anything which come up. So with the permission of the host, I will take you to the decisions. I may request Mr. Surya Narayana to provide me the provision for sharing the file.
Yes, yes. Please proceed.
It still says I am not able to. Only the host can share. That share option is not. You are able to enable that, Surya Narayana? No, share content is not possible. It is not coming up. I'm saying only the host can share in this meeting. Okay, I will just take you to judgments, and probably one judgment, as I said during the process, is that Surya Dev Rai, which initially said that an Article 226 petition will lie. That is the case reported in 2003 6 SCC 675. I will read only one paragraph of that Surya Dev Rai. It is titled as, the heading in the judgment itself says supervisory jurisdiction under Article 227. Let me find, Zoom. Screen share is not happening. So I will just read out from my notes. Supervisory jurisdiction under Article 227. Article 227 of the Constitution confers on every High Court the power of superintendence over all courts and tribunals throughout the territories in relation to which it exercises jurisdiction, excepting any court or tribunal constituted by so and so on. This is the provision. Without prejudice to the generality of such power of the High Court has been conferred with certain specific powers under sub-article 2 and 3 of Article 227, with which we are not concerned here. It is well settled that the power of superintendence so conferred on the High Court is administrative as well as judicial. This is the crucial line which you have to note. It is well settled that the power of superintendence so conferred on the High Court is administrative as well as judicial and is capable of being invoked at the instance of a person aggrieved or may even be exercised suo motu. When I said when you read Article 227, you don't find that a person aggrieved can file a petition. It only says it's supreme. Therefore, the Supreme Court said this power is administrative as well as judicial and capable of being invoked at the instance of any person aggrieved or may even be exercised suo motu. The paramount consideration behind vesting with such wide power of superintendence in the High Court is paying the path of justice and removing any obstacles therein. The power of under Article 227 is wider than the one conferred on the High Court by Article 226 in the sense that the power of superintendence is not subject to those technicalities of procedure or traditional fetters which are to be found in certiorari jurisdiction. Else, the parameters invoking the exercise of power are almost similar. Then it said the history of supervisory jurisdiction exercised by the High Court and how the jurisdiction has culminated into its present shape under Article 226 of the Constitution was traced in the case of Vairam Singh and another, reported in 1954, 1 SCR 565. The jurisdiction can be traced back to Section 15 of the High Courts Act 1861, which gave a power of judicial superintendence to the High Courts apart from and independently of the provisions of other laws conferring revisional jurisdiction on the High Court, namely Section 107 of the Government of India Act, then 224 so and so. So there is a huge legislative background to this provision itself. Now, having said this, in this case of Surya Dev Roy, the Supreme Court, in fact, effectively also dealt with the position by heading, does the amendment in Section 115 of CPC have any impact on the jurisdiction under Article 226 and 227? It referred to Chandrakumar's case and Govind versus State of Delhi and said, post amendment to 115, there is an effective remedy available under Article 226 and 227. It said the power of the High Court under Article 227 cannot be whittled down, nullified, curtailed, or abrogated, diluted, or taken either by judicial pronouncement or by legislative enactment, or even by the amendment to the Constitution. So, recognizing all these things, but interestingly, in this case, the Supreme Court said a writ will lie. In paragraph 37, in fact, it said such matters like frequently arise before the High Courts. It summed up the conclusion as to how it has to be done. So, in effect, it finally said a writ will lie under Article 226 as against a decision of the Civil Court. But as I said, this was reversed in the case of Radhe Shyam and others, reported in 2015 5 SCC page 423. Now I will only read. See, the reference order for this Radhe Shyam read as follows. Radhe Shyam was referred to a 3-judge bench by a 2-judge, not agreeing with the Surya Dev Roy. So reference order said, therefore this court unfortunately is in disagreement with the view which has been expressed in Surya Dev Roy insofar as correction of any interference with judicial order of civil court by a writ of certiorari is concerned. Under Article 227 of the Constitution, High Court does not issue a writ of certiorari. Article 227 of the Constitution vests the High Court with the power of superintendence, which is to be very sparingly exercised to keep tribunals and courts within the bounds of this authority, within the bounds of their authority. Under Article 227, orders of both civil and criminal courts can be examined only in very exceptional cases when manifest miscarriage of justice has been occasioned. Such power, however, is not to be exercised to correct a mistake of fact or law. The essential distinctions in the exercise of powers under Article 226 and 227 are well known and pointed out in Surya Dev Roy, and with that we have no disagreement. But we are unable to agree with the legal proposition laid down in Surya Dev Roy that judicial orders passed by a civil court can be examined and then corrected, reversed by a writ court under Article 226 in exercise of its powers under writ of certiorari. We are of the view that the aforesaid proposition laid down in Surya Dev Roy is contrary to the ratio laid down and ratio in so-and-so has been overruled in so-and-so. In view of our differences of opinion with the views expressed in Surya Dev Roy, this is placed before a judges of three bench. Then the bench took up the reference and went into various aspects, decided, referred to the various judgments on these points, and finally came to a conclusion. Two or three paragraphs. At paragraph 22, it said, the bench in Surya Dev Roy also observed in paragraph 25 of judgment, the distinction between article 226, 227 stood almost obliterated. Paragraph 24 of judgment, distinction in two articles has been noted. Then it said there has been series of judgments on this point. In our view, even if scope of section 115 of Civil Procedure Code is curtailed, that has not resulted in expanding the High Court's power of superintendence. This is exactly the wordings when they reiterated as regarding the powers under 227. Now, having said this, the three judges bench, in fact, answered the reference in these following words. Judicial orders of civil courts are not amenable to writ jurisdiction under Article 226 of the Constitution. Jurisdiction under Article 227 is distinct from jurisdiction under Article 226. Therefore, contrary view in Surya Dev Roy is overruled. So that view was overruled in Radhesham. Then you will have one judgment of one of the oldest judgment of year 1954, reported in AAR 1953, SC page 23. Kesharao Dio versus Charmia versus Radha Kishan Charmia and others. This was again a three-judge bench. It's a four judges benches of Supreme Court. Justice Mahajan, Justice Das, Justice Vivian Bose, and Justice Ghulam Hassan. Now, this judgment traced the entire history as regarding the supervisory jurisdiction powers of the High Court under 115 by referring to decisions of Privy Council. Now, in paragraph 22, we now proceed to consider whether revision was competent against the order dated so and so. Then it held the revisional jurisdiction of the High Court is set out in the 115th section of Code of Civil Procedure in these terms. The High Court may call for it, it extracts the provision. Then it says, a large number of cases have been collected in 4th edition of Chitale Rouse CPC, which only serve to show that the High Courts have not always appreciated the limits of jurisdiction conferred by this section. What was intended to authorize the High Courts to interfere and correct gross and palpable errors of subordinate courts so as to prevent grave injustice in non-appealable cases. In these circumstances, it is worthwhile recalling again to mind the decision of Privy Council on this subject and the limits stated therein for the exercise of jurisdiction conferred. Therefore, as early as in 1953, the Supreme Court dealt with an issue which arises under section 115 and referred to Privy Council decision. 3 or 4 Privy Council decisions are there, which are extracted in paragraph 24, 25, and 26. And one such case in paragraph 26 is arising from the Madras. It is a case of Venkatagiri Iyengar versus Hindu Religious Endowment Board. The Privy Council again examined the scope of section 115 and observed that they could see no justification for the view that the section was intended to authorize the High Court to interfere and correct gross and palpable errors of subordinate courts so as to prevent grave injustice in a non-appealable cases, and that it would be difficult to formulate any standard by which the degree of error of subordinate courts could be measured. Then it refers on to judgments. This is only for purpose of having a reading of it. Likewise, there is few more judgments. I will only give the citations which would enable you to have a look at it. Case of Anil Kak versus Municipal Corporation reported in 2005, 12 SCC 734. Now here, the point was, before the Civil Code, before the High Court, a petition under section 115 was filed. During the proceedings, High Court finds two things. High Court at the first instance found that there was something grossly illegal in the proceeding before the court. But High Court also found that that was not deciding the list for its finality. Therefore, there were certain fetters under section 115. What High Court did is that it treated the petition as a petition under Article 227 and granted the relief. That was challenged before the Supreme Court. Now, while Supreme Court deciding this matter, approved this action of High Court of having treated the petition under 115 into a petition under 227 to grant a relief. So this is one important aspect which you can take note. So therefore, the moment it doesn't fall under section 115, relief, if it is to be granted, if it falls within the parameters where there is a gross requirement of the High Court to interfere, it has to treat it as a petition under section 227. And there is one more case reported in 2002-5 SCC, page 510, case of ITI Limited versus Siemens Public Communication. This dealt with the issue about, under the Arbitration Act, a petition of appeal goes before the district court, as against which whether a revision under 115 was maintainable. A plea was taken saying that Arbitration Act being a special enactment, therefore the High Court cannot exercise power of 115. The High Court was convinced on the point that the appeal under section 27 of the Arbitration Act was before the district court, and in that proceedings, if there are certain things which the High Court has power to look into, it can exercise a right under section 115. Therefore, even in case of a special enactment, the High Court held that this revisional jurisdiction will be exercised. So I am only just giving a thought for you as to areas which you can look at, an overview as to how this jurisprudence has developed and in what effective manner it can be a tool in the hands of a lawyers. Thank you very much for the session. Thanks for the friends for having joined me in this and heard me for such a long period of time without getting bored. And any questions on this, I will be ready to answer.
One Mr. Vinod had a question. I'll unmute him. Vinod A. Vinod A.
சார் வணக்கம் சார்.
வணக்கம் சார்.
சார் நான் ஸ்டூடெண்ட் சார்.
எஸ்.
அதில் வந்துட்டு எங்களுக்கு ஒரு மூட் ப்ராப்ளம் கொடுத்துருந்தாங்க. அதில் 226 ரெட் வித் 227ல பெட்டிஷன் ஃபைல் பண்ணுற மாதிரி கொடுத்துருந்தாங்க சார்.
ஓகே.
அப்படி ஒரு பெட்டிஷன் ஃபைல் பண்ண முடியுமா சார், ரெட் வித்ன்னு போட்டு?
இப்போ நான் சொன்ன 2-3 ஜட்மெண்ட்ஸ் நீங்கள் எடுத்து பார்த்தீங்கன்னா you will get a clear clarity. See, red with 227 and போடலாம். There is nothing wrong in it. But what is the relief you are asking under the crucial? If it is in respect of the supervisory jurisdiction, revisional jurisdiction against civil proceedings, 226 will not come. You cannot say red with 227. If your relief is only in respect of the prerogative writs under 226, but still it is against a tribunal which is subordinate to the High Court, you can say it is red with 227. What is crucial is that you have to see and the relief நீங்க கேட்கறதுல supervisory jurisdiction of the High Court வருதா, relief which you are seeking and against which authority or body, அவங்க வந்து High Court supervisory jurisdiction இருக்காங்க. For example, ஒரு கவர்மெண்ட் பாஸ் பண்ற ஆர்டரை சேலஞ்ச் பண்ணி ரிட் பெட்டிஷன் போடுறீங்கன்னு வச்சுக்கோங்க. அந்த கவர்மெண்ட் is not within the supervisory jurisdiction of High Court for the purpose of administration, because 227 says administrative powers, giving directions for the functioning of the subordinate judiciary. If it is not within the supervisory power, saying that 227 is not correct. It is in fact infructuous. It doesn't have a meaning. So therefore, you have to look at if the order which you are questioning, 226, is against an authority who is subject to the subordination of the High Court or who is within the supervisory jurisdiction of the High Court in its administrative side, and if that order is part of a judicial or quasi-judicial order, you may add. So, this is the larger aspect. You have the 2-3 judgment, you will have a particular mood problem. You have to apply that to the judgment, to the points which are there, and decide.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Om V.S. Jayakumar, advocate, has raised his hand, sir. I am unmuting him.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Om Prakash, you have done a fantastic job of.
Good evening, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
See, I have I'm absolutely novice in the field you have been handling. A fundamental doubt is, you know, that LPA, letters patent appeal.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Now, the case of categories which can fall under the LPA cases.
Yes.
Will they fall under 227? Because you read a judgment just now. I wrongly heard it as 15, but I think it's 115. Maybe the Supreme Court judgment. Surya Desraju mentioned.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So if a case which is falling under LPA
Yes.
And those cases come under either 115 or under 227 is my first doubt.
Yes.
The second doubt is, see, recently the Supreme Court in Glaxo case, which is, of course, the tax case,
Yes.
there was a case before the Andhra Pradesh case,
Yes.
and appeal before the first appellate authority had a statutory time of 30 days.
Okay.
Contemnable another 15 days, totally 45 days.
Yes.
On the 46th day, this person filed under Article 227 before
Yes.
the Andhra Pradesh High Court. The question was, can the High Court go beyond the limitation granted by the statutory appellate forum? What classically mentions a distinction between Article 142 and 227. And then, as you correctly put it, only when the lower court has got a jurisdiction and not done in a manner known to law, then only they can do under 227. So,
Yes.
15 of the letter patterns, the jurisdiction.
On the first question, sir, it is a categorical no. Orders under 115 and orders under 227, there is no letter patent appeal. That is very categorically said by a full bench of Delhi High Court as well as Supreme Court. In fact, they had occasion to categorize this. A case which was filed before a criminal bench, terming it as a petition under 227. And they had one instance where a petition is termed as 226 and 227. Ultimately, when the relief, the Supreme Court read into it and said that this is a relief falling within the purview of 227 in the exercise of supervisory jurisdiction. Therefore, they said no letters patent appeal. So that is settled position of law. Orders under 115 or 227 by a single judge, you don't have a letters patent appeal to the division bench.
Very good, sir. The suo motu action taken by under 227, what are the parameters?
Suo motu action under 227, High Court has got vast powers. Only thing is that it is under the supervisory jurisdiction, and while exercising that powers, it can only look at what the subordinate forum has done, court or forum has done. And if it falls within these parameters as to exercise of the supervisory jurisdiction, it cannot rewrite the judgment, it cannot make it as an appeal in disguise, it cannot sit on the decision also. It has to rectify that portion and send it across to them. But of course, it has powers suo motu to entertain the petition.
Sorry, sir, some call intervened. Sorry. Okay.
Yes, sir. It has a power of supervisory jurisdiction. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Very nice of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other person who has a question to Om? I think Om, the questioning section is over. Thanks a lot for the wonderful session, and thank you all for joining us in this evening hours and spending your time usefully.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all the members who had joined. Thanks to Surya Narayan.